Carol Blake had always envisioned her marriage to be the perfect union. At 32, she had married Ryan, a charming, successful businessman 4 years her senior, whose charisma and ambition were impossible to ignore. He had swept her off her feet, promising her a life of love and stability. Yet now, 7 months into her pregnancy, she barely recognized the man she had married. It started gradually, as all great betrayals do. Ryan's once gentle tone had turned cold, his touch distant. The intimate connection they had shared in the early years seemed to have evaporated into thin air, replaced by a sense of obligation and duty. Ryan often stayed late at work, citing deadlines and meetings that never seemed to end. He would come home long after Carol had fallen asleep, reeking of alcohol and cigarettes, an eerie contrast to the man she had once known. As her pregnancy progressed, Ryan's irritation grew palpable. He barely looked at her anymore, especially when her body began to show the signs of carrying their child. Carol noticed his sneers when she caught his gaze lingering on her swollen belly. One evening, after a particularly long day of back pain and nausea, Carol waited up for Ryan. She had prepared a simple dinner, hoping they could sit together like they used to. But when Ryan entered the house, his steps heavy and uneven, it was clear he had been drinking again. "Ryan," Carol started softly, "we need to talk." He glanced at her, his face set in a grimace. "Talk about what?" he muttered, dropping his keys on the counter with a clatter. "I'm 7 months pregnant, Ryan. We should be planning, getting ready for the baby. But you're never here, and when you are, it feels like you're a stranger." His lips curled into a sneer. "I didn't sign up for this, Carol. This baby was your idea. I never wanted to be tied down. And now look at you." His eyes raked over her, filled with disdain. "Look at us." Her heart raced, the shock of his words hitting her like a blow. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying," he said slowly, deliberately, "that I don't want this. I don't want you, and I sure as hell don't want a kid." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Carol stood frozen, her mind reeling. This wasn't the man she had married. This wasn't the life she had dreamed of. For days after that conversation, Carol couldn't shake Ryan's words. She tried to rationalize them, to find a way to make sense of his sudden cruelty, but deep down, she knew the truth had been there all along. Ryan didn't love her anymore, if he ever truly had. One morning, after Ryan had rushed out to another one of his meetings, Carol went about her routine, cleaning the house and sorting laundry. It was in the pocket of his suit jacket that she found the first clue. A small slip of paper, crumpled but legible, a receipt from a motel just outside town, dated 2 nights ago. Her hands trembled as she stared at it. The pieces of a puzzle slowly began to fit together. The late nights, the distant look in his eyes, the phone calls he always took in private, it all pointed to one thing. Ryan was cheating. Carol felt a mixture of rage and heartbreak bubbling inside her. How could he do this to her? To their unborn child? Had he been using her all along? Determined to uncover the truth, she began paying closer attention. Ryan's behavior grew more erratic, and the more distant he became, the more Carol suspected that his affair was not just a fleeting fling but something deeper, something planned. Carol's investigations took her to dark places. She found more receipts, more evidence that Ryan had been frequenting motels with a younger woman. The final confirmation came when she followed him one evening, watching as he entered a restaurant with a woman, one of his employees, a young assistant named Lila. The sight of them together, laughing and sharing an intimate dinner, shattered the last remnants of her hope. Ryan hadn't just fallen out of love with her, he had replaced her with someone else. That night, Carol couldn't sleep. The betrayal was like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of their relationship, wondering where things had gone wrong. In the morning, her resolve hardened. She knew she couldn't stay in this marriage any longer. Ryan had broken their vows, and there was no coming back from that. But she couldn't just walk away quietly. She deserved more than that, her child deserved more. The next time Ryan came home, Carol was ready. She had spent days consulting a lawyer, preparing the papers. She waited until he sat down at the dining table, barely acknowledging her presence, before she placed the documents in front of him. "What's this?" he asked, glancing at the papers. "It's a divorce," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "You've made it clear you don't want this marriage, and I won't raise our child in a broken home." Ryan's face darkened. "You're being dramatic, Carol. We can work this out." "No," she said firmly. "You've been unfaithful, Ryan. I know about Lila." His expression shifted from irritation to shock. "You've been spying on me? I don't need to spy to see what's right in front of me. Sign the papers, Ryan. This is over." For a moment, Ryan looked as though he might argue, but then his gaze hardened. "Fine," he said, snatching the pen. "But don't think you're going to take anything from me. You quit your job, remember? I made sure you're dependent on me." Carol smiled, a cold, bitter smile. "That's where you're wrong." 2 weeks after Carol moved out, her life took an unexpected turn. Ryan had no idea that Carol's father was one of the wealthiest tech entrepreneurs in the country. For years, she had kept that part of her life quiet, not wanting to draw attention to her family's fortune. She had wanted to build her own life, her own identity. But now, that secrecy was no longer necessary. A popular TV show aired an interview with her father, who had just announced his intention to retire and pass on the company to his only daughter. The segment showed a glimpse of the family's luxurious lifestyle, including Carol, who was now living at her parents' estate with her newborn son, Samuel. It didn't take long for Ryan to find out. He called her one afternoon, furious. "You lied to me," he shouted through the phone. "You're sitting on a fortune, and you didn't tell me?" Carol remained calm. "I didn't think it was relevant. Besides, it's my inheritance, not yours." Ryan's voice seethed with anger. "Half of that is mine, Carol. We're married. I deserve my share." "That's not how it works," she replied coolly. "And in case you forgot, you're the one who cheated. The court won't side with you." After the divorce, Ryan's life spiraled out of control. His affair with Lila quickly soured as she revealed her own materialistic tendencies. Ryan's finances, already strained from the cost of maintaining his lifestyle, collapsed under the weight of his new wife's demands. Within months, he found himself buried in debt. He had hoped to leverage Carol's inheritance to escape his financial ruin, but her refusal left him grasping at straws. Ryan's attempts to negotiate with Carol were futile. Every lawyer he consulted confirmed the same grim reality: he had no legal claim to her inheritance. Carol had protected her assets well before the marriage, and there was no loophole to exploit. Still, he couldn't let go of the belief that he deserved more. In his twisted view, her success was something he had a right to, a sentiment that only deepened his bitterness. As his financial situation worsened, Ryan became more desperate. Lila, the woman for whom he had sacrificed everything, had little patience for his growing failures. She had enjoyed the benefits of their affair when things were easy, but as the money ran out, so did her loyalty. One morning, Ryan came home to find her gone, along with several valuable items from their apartment. She had drained what little was left in their joint bank account. The betrayal stung, but Ryan could barely muster the energy to care. His life had unraveled so completely that even anger seemed a distant emotion. In the span of a year, he had lost everything: his marriage, his child, his financial security, and now, the woman he had thought he loved. Sitting alone in the dark, his empty apartment suffocating him, Ryan finally began to realize the full scope of his mistakes. He had built his entire existence on shallow ambitions and manipulations, and now, he had nothing left but regret. While Ryan's world crumbled, Carol's life blossomed into something she could hardly have imagined during the darkest days of her marriage. The birth of her son, Samuel, had brought her a deep sense of purpose and joy. He became her anchor, a reminder of the future she was building, a future where she was in control of her own destiny. Living at her family's estate gave Carol the stability she needed to focus on her next steps. With her father's company transitioning into her hands, she threw herself into learning the ins and outs of the business. Though she had always been somewhat involved in the company's activities, taking over as CEO was a monumental task. But Carol was determined. She wanted to prove to herself, and to the world, that she could handle the responsibility and thrive, not because of her family's wealth but because of her own merit. Her parents, supportive yet proud, were amazed at how gracefully Carol handled everything: the divorce, motherhood, and the pressures of leadership. Despite everything she had been through, she had emerged stronger, more self-assured. As the months passed, Carol found herself reflecting on the person she had been before. She realized how much of her life she had let slip through her fingers while trying to mold herself into someone Ryan wanted. Now, as she navigated the demands of running a multi-million-dollar corporation and raising a child, she felt more like herself than ever before. Each decision she made, whether in the boardroom or at home, brought her closer to the person she had always wanted to be, independent, strong, and in control of her own narrative. But Carol wasn't just rebuilding her life for herself, she was doing it for Samuel, too. She wanted to give him the kind of upbringing where love and respect were paramount, where he would never have to witness the kind of dysfunction that had plagued her marriage. One evening, after putting Samuel to bed, Carol sat by the large windows overlooking her family's sprawling estate. She felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The past year had been filled with challenges, but she had made it through. She had weathered betrayal, heartache, and uncertainty, and she had come out the other side stronger. Ryan's desperation reached its peak one afternoon when he showed up at Carol's family estate, uninvited and unannounced. He had spent the last of his savings on a lawyer who told him what he already knew: there was no legal recourse for him to claim any part of Carol's inheritance. The realization that he was truly on his own had driven him to a breaking point. Carol was in the garden with Samuel when she saw him approach, his figure gaunt, his eyes hollow. Her initial instinct was to turn away, but something made her stop. She hadn't seen Ryan since the day he had signed the divorce papers, and she couldn't help but feel a surge of pity for the man who now stood before her, broken and disheveled. "Carol," he called out, his voice strained, "we need to talk." She straightened, holding Samuel close. "What could we possibly have to talk about, Ryan?" He took a few unsteady steps forward, as if trying to gather his thoughts. "I made mistakes. I know that. But you can't just cut me out. We had a life together, a family." Carol's expression was unreadable. "No, Ryan. You destroyed that life. You made your choices, and now you're facing the consequences." Ryan's face twisted in frustration. "You don't understand. I'm losing everything. Lila left me, I'm in debt. I don't have anyone." A long silence hung between them. Carol searched his face, looking for any sign of the man she had once loved, but all she saw was a shell of someone consumed by greed and bitterness. There was no redemption to be found here. "You made your bed, Ryan," she said quietly, "and now you have to lie in it. I'm not responsible for saving you." For a moment, Ryan looked like he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped, defeated. He seemed to realize, perhaps for the first time, that there was no going back. He had lost Carol, truly lost her, and the life they had once shared was now a distant memory. Without another word, Ryan turned and walked away, disappearing down the long driveway that led away from her family's home. Carol watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. In some ways, this final confrontation was the closure she had needed, the final chapter in a story she was ready to leave behind. In the months following Ryan's last visit, Carol's life took on a steady rhythm. She continued to grow into her role as CEO, earning the respect of her peers and transforming her father's company into something new and innovative. The business thrived under her leadership, but more importantly, so did her personal life. Surrounded by her family's love and support, Carol built a new future for herself and Samuel. She no longer thought of Ryan or the pain he had caused her, except as a distant memory, a lesson in self-worth and resilience. Every challenge she faced had made her stronger, and now, she was free to focus on what truly mattered. Samuel grew into a bright and curious child, the light of Carol's life. As he toddled through the gardens where his mother had once stood, watching the world with wide-eyed wonder, Carol knew that every sacrifice she had made had been worth it. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. And this time, Carol would write her own story, one filled with love, integrity, and hope. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.